What's up? Just do 50JP in the house. Okay, so I want to start talking about some serious things, and I can get back to the women later or whatever. Okay, listen. What's going on with the police and the blacks and American stuff like that is really a simple problem that can easily be solved, but people just got to take actions and stuff and understand what's going on. So I want to start talking about the mind, the hormones, and the tissue and the body and how they all work. Basically, when they say you think, a lot of people's definition of thinking is actively thinking and stuff like that. But really what it is you have a mind, that part of you that's just there. And then you got your brain, which is a tool. Then you have your hormones, which delivers coded messages from that your brain codes to your tissues and your hormones. And all you gotta do is just look up the definition of hormones, and it'll tell you. If you find a basic one, it'll just say hormones make the tissues and glands move. That's it, you know. So when you're thinking, well, the thinking that what you're doing when you're thinking is you're not actually thinking what we a lot of us probably misunderstand as thinking. But what you're doing is your brain is calculating. Your brain is processing data, and that's all it's doing. And what it is you're encoding it, however it encodes itself, you know. You're encoding, you're processing data, and that's all you're doing. That's all your brain does. That's all your brain does. Then what happens is you want to send. Then what happens is, let's say like if you want to walk to the store, so you want to walk 10 feet, right, or 10 meters or whatever. Then you'll encode that command in your brain. Then you release your hormones, and your brain encodes the put that encoding into your hormones. Then your hormones go throughout your body, and at the appropriate places it decodes that program into into your glands and your tissues. And your tissues are muscles, basically, is what I'm saying. And then your muscles does whatever that command is. That's all what you're doing, and people need to understand that. Another thing what people need to understand is that everything that you do has been processed in your mind first. It's processed, and process means it goes through your mind, and because you understand force and pressures, thermodynamics, physics, trigonometry, calculus, whatever else it is, because you understand it by seeing it. The only thing is you just don't know the labels. That's it. And you don't know the details of it. That's why you go to school to learn that stuff. But basically you already know it. Your mind already knows that stuff, okay? Because that's what your body is. Your body is made up of thermonuclear, the nucleus is in your body, and this and that, and you know, muscles and the pressures and stimulants and all of that stuff, you know. And that's what everything is pretty much made of. So your mind already knows that. Your mind knows how the body functions. The only thing is you don't know how. Consciously you don't know how. Consciously you don't know. So that's why you go to school to learn this stuff. But basically, in your mind, you make this thing. Okay, well, I want to walk 10 feet. And so before you just walk to 10 feet, you look and you see any obstacles, if you got to jump over any cars or dodge any crazy people, or help a lady across the street, or pay your bills first, or whatever. And then you check in the weather, if it's wet outside, or is there anything that's going to where you take a step, is something going to push you out of the way, or how the temperature is. You're processing all of this stuff on your mind, and it's just going by like a split seconds, bam, 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 bam. And then you say, okay, this is the way I'm going to do it. I'm just going to walk straight. And then you're going to think, well, how fast are you going to walk? Because how fast you're going to walk is going to depend on how much pressure you're going to put on your feet and on your body, and whether how much energy you want to use and stuff like that. And you go through this and you process all of this stuff in your mind. Then you say, okay, well, I'm gonna walk there. I'm gonna walk 10 feet in 10 seconds or 5 seconds. So that means you got to run. So then you have to exert, you got to encode all that to exert the adrenaline, release the adrenaline. It goes, you encode that, send it to your hormones, and then all of a sudden, you start feeling the adrenaline just start building up, and your muscles tense up and stuff, or you start get ready to move and all this stuff, and then all of a sudden you sprint, bam, 10 feet, and you do it in 5 seconds, and then you finish, you're tired, and that's it. And basically that's what you do when you do this. In every aspect of your life, everything that you think about, everything that you did, it was processed in your mind first. Processed, it was planned out, it was drawn, planned out, checked out, all the conditions, everything was checked out, everything, and then there were certain conditions that you accepted, and then bam, you encoded it, sent it, your hormones picked it up, sent it to their correspondent or the appropriate tissues and hormones, and bam, you did that. Now, when it comes to your life, your personal life, everything you do is the same thing. When you study, when you go to school and your teachers teach you something, what they're doing is they're teaching you the basics of life. When you're learning math, when you're learning history, when you're learning sciences, whatever, all they're doing is just teaching you the basics. They're teaching you things that's already known, that's already been tested. They already have steps. All you have to do is just remember the vocabulary and then follow the same steps. It's like teaching a kid how to draw a circle. It's like teaching a kid how to draw a line or write a letter. It's the same thing. And the kids always too hard, they can't do it. And you get upset. No, yes you can. Yes you can. Yes you can. Well, the teacher, when you go to school and you say, I can't do it, the teacher say, yes you can. I'm showing you if you just listen. Well, I don't understand the vocabulary. You're using all these big vocabulary. And the teacher say, well, last year, you just happened to be in the same class and I gave you over 700 words for you to memorize. Did you go home and memorize it and you took the test? Wait, let me see. They probably got notes and go back and look, oh, you failed the test. So evidently you didn't study. So that's not my fault. I gave you the work. You didn't go home and open up the dictionaries and use the sentences and write them in sentences. And you didn't use those words when you're out in the street and talking to your friends. I told you what to do. You didn't do it. So now you're lacking and you're blaming me. It's not my fault. It's not the teacher's fault. It's your fault. So the teachers, they're teaching you things, everything. When you go to universities and high school, junior high school, when you're at home, your mama teaching you everything. They're not teaching you anything new. They're teaching you things that's already been done, tested, stamped, and approved. And all you have to do is just memorize some definitions. And the definition in English is basically just pictures. Basically pictures, emotions, and descriptions, and that's it. But a lot of people, they don't want to listen. They don't want to memorize these big words. But these big words are nothing but synonyms. They just words used, just different words that they use. And I was talking to a friend, and he was saying the same thing. Oh, they use all these big words and stuff. And I started laughing, and I said, okay, so you're from the South. I'm from LA. If I went to your neighborhood and start talking like I talk in LA, then maybe you guys may understand what I'm saying. Maybe you won't. But I know for sure when y'all get to talking that Southern slang and they're slurring those R's and stuff, I'm like, what the fuck are you saying? I don't understand what you're saying. Excuse me? Can you repeat again? Speak English? And he started laughing. And I said, the reason they teach you those big words where they're nothing but just synonyms, if you get a dictionary, a thesaurus, and you look up those big words, I'm sure in there it's going to have a word that black people use in their communities and stuff like that, like for show, and it might be certainly, and it might be for show or truth or whatever, so they got those words in there. But the whole thing is a lot of us didn't take the time to learn the vocabulary, so they're not big words. So he said, well, why do you have to use those words? And I said, well, just imagine if all the kids in different communities were in one class together and they all had different slangs and everything else, and they start talking to each other. You're going to spend most of the day trying to figure out what everyone is saying. You know, and then you got to cut out all the laughing and stuff. You know, some people joking about people from the south and the south, joking about people from the north, and then west people saying people from New York talk too dang go fast, and the north, the people from the east don't like the way Californians talk because they always sounding happy and stuff. And we're like, well, it's not our fault y'all sounding all depressed and stuff. You know, what you doing living in the east when it's all cold and wet and snowing? You come to the south, so to the west where it's all sunny and stuff. You know, people up north, y'all people in the south, well, y'all it's raining all the time, y'all getting flooded out, come down to the south, you know, and blah blah. South is just too hot. Well, then take your butt back up north, you know, don't complain, you know. So basically you're gonna spend a whole day complaining. So what it is, if they don't teach you, it's easier. What they do is they teach you different synonyms. They make a whole new language so that everyone can learn the language and be able to communicate with each other without having any misunderstandings and stuff like that. So because it's easier to teach everyone a whole new language than it is to teach everyone else's language. And so that's the point of learning language. It has nothing to do with big words and all that stuff, because you got to understand a lot of white people, not a lot of people that all white people got to give. There are a lot of poor white people in the United States. There are a lot of, matter of fact, more poor Republican white people are on welfare than there are probably Democratic people. If you like in Kentucky, it's a red state, and they got, I saw this thing on Facebook, I don't know if it's true or not, but they said it was this one family, they were like kind of fat, white family, they were fat, and they're getting $3,000 a month for food stamps because they were too big to work and stuff. And basically what it is that a lot of people are not looking at the real America. You know, they're not really looking at what the real America is, what the majority of it is. So basically, when you look at those things, and then you kind of find out like, oh, okay, now I understand the language. It's just synonyms. You know, it's just a way where you can communicate with someone and someone else communicate with you in a way where there's no confusion. So both of you have to learn those synonyms, and that's all it is, so you can communicate effectively with someone else who might not speak English, and they learning those words. So they're not going to I mean, you know, you like be like, I don't want to learn those big words, but yet some Asian person or some European person who speaks a different language come up and go, yo nigga, what's up? You know, you want them to really learn our language? Even they doing it now. You know, they learning it. And they, you know, we got white kids calling each other niggas and stuff now. You know, so they learning it. But when they talk it to you, you don't want them to say your language to you. So then, if you don't want to learn a mutual language, which I call it, and you don't want no one to learn your language, then how are you going to communicate with each other, with other people? How you expect people to truly understand with you what you're saying, truly develop some kind of emotional connection, rapport, whatever, and all that stuff with you, if you can't even don't even have the decency, the self-respect, you know, of yourself to learn to communicate more effectively. That's all learning vocabulary is. It's just to communicate more effectively at a level where everyone else is communicating and using the same language. That's all you're doing. And so I was telling him that, and he started laughing, you know, and so we're talking and stuff, and I'm saying, okay, so what is multiply? You know, and you know, he just started looking at it. He said, okay, well, this is, okay, wait, I'm not even going to, and he did the smart thing. He said, I'm not even going to start thinking, I'm just going to open the dictionary and read it. So he opened up a dictionary and started reading and all that stuff. And I think it was modify. And he said, modify, because we were talking about adverbs. And so he started reading the definition about adverbs, and adverbs modifies adjectives and other adverbs and verbs and blah, 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 blah. And I started laughing. And I said, okay, well, what does the word modify means? And so then that's when he said, well, it means, you know, he said, wait a minute, you know, I'm not even going to think, but I'm just going to read it. And so he started getting ready to read. And I said, no, it just means to change or to add on to it. And that's it. But what the word adverb, what is the word adverb? And he said, well, it's this and that. And I said, well, basically what you're saying is true. But if I say I run I run slow. Then when you hear that slow, what happens? You know, he didn't catch on, so I told him, I said, adverbs are just emotions. That's all they are. They're words that make you create an emotional state. That's all. You know, last night I was talking to a guy, Coco Boss. Me and him was hanging out. We hung out all day. And I was saying it's funny about English, because when you start talking about English, you have a and the. A and is not special, the is special. That's basically the definition. A and the, you only use a or and if noun is countable, and if it's not special to you. If it's not countable, then you don't use, if it's countable. If it's not uncountable, then you don't use a or and. You use the if the noun is special to you. And that's it. And the is singular and plural, a is singular, and that's it. You know, and then you got the adverbs. The adverbs are nothing but emotions. So if I say a very, then I already know that whatever that noun is not special. And very is a word that creates some type of excitement, because emotions create excitement, whether it's dull or whether the excitement is high or low. And so I started jumping around, because we were in front of the psychiatry station. I started jumping around. A very, a very, a very, and he started laughing. And I said, why are you laughing? That's true. That's English. And I said, if I say the very, then I know whatever the noun is that is special. And very means I'm getting excited. So now I'm doubly excited. And he's just laughing. And then I said you had an adverb. And then I said the adverb. And then, okay, well, I'll talk about that one later. I'll get back to it with the original. So what I was telling him was that when you're reading, they give you all these definitions, and it's true. But a lot of people just don't really take the time to think and realize that an adverb is just a feeling. That's all it is. Then you have an adjective. And so I asked him what it was. He said, well, you just tell me. I said, okay. I said, adjective is just a description. That's it. 2x4, blue, green, yellow, big, whatever, you know. And then you have the noun. And so basically in English you have, and that's called a noun phrase, okay? And you got a adjective, adjective, and a noun. So you got something that's special, or something, and it's only one, or something that's not special. That's not special. That's special, and it's singular and plural. Or you got something that's well, let me start over. You got something that's not special, one of something that's not special, okay, and it's countable or uncountable. Then you got something that's special, and it could be one or a whole bunch of things. And then you get excited. First, it causes you to get excited, the adverb, and then next it gives you a description. So you're getting excited first, and you don't even know what the hell you're getting excited about, and then it gives you a description, and so you're getting excited over some description about something, and then they give you the noun. And then when you finally realize what it is, you're like, holy fuck, what the fuck? You know, so it's like, I was talking to him, I'm going Coco Boss, and I said, yeah, a very, oh my God, very green, a green, oh my God, mouse, huh? Where you getting yourself a very green mouse? Well, that's the English language. It gets you all messed up first, you know, before, and it's the same thing in Japanese. You know, you get it, you know, you get the subject, I, you know, whatever, and then you get the excited and stuff. And maybe all languages are like that. I don't know. It's just funny though, and it's really not good actually, because it really puts a lot of adverbs and stuff, and emotional releasement and stuff, put a lot of stress on your body and stuff. So anyway, we were talking about that, and me and my friend, and I was just telling him that, hey, you know, the whole problem is when you go to school is that a lot of people just don't pay attention. So we were talking about noun phrases and stuff like that. He said, well, why didn't they teach us in school? I started laughing, and I said, they taught you that in school? I don't remember. I said, yeah, because you probably didn't pay attention, because you didn't take the time to look up in the dictionary, or you were playing or doing something else, you know. And that's all it is, you know. And a lot of kids, they grow up and they don't really take the time to understand what what is that thing called? What studying is all about. You know, a lot of people really don't. I mean, what I'm gonna do is I'm going someplace right now, Suma Beach, and so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stop every 30 minutes. Okay, so you guys don't have to, so you can take breaks and stuff. So anyway, so when we were doing that, you know, we started talking about math and stuff, and you know, and I showed him really easy. I said, you know, I could teach three-year-old kids to do division and multiplying in, you know, a couple of minutes. And I said, do you believe me? And he was like, you know, and so far everything I said was right. So he said, okay, yeah, I believe it. And I gave him a sheet of paper, and I showed it to him. I mean, I told him to get a piece of paper he was writing. I just made a diagram and sent it to him, you know, and he tripped how easy it was, how simple. And he said, wow, why didn't they teach us in school? I think he said something like that. If he didn't say it, that's what most people say. I'm like, maybe. I said, I don't know. I said, I don't know, but, you know, you still can't, you know, I don't know. But what I tell a lot of people when they're complaining about not learning this and stuff, was that, you know, you're an adult, and there comes a time in your life where you're going to have to educate yourself. If you're having problems in math and now that you're an adult, well, you're an adult, so you know that you got to take the time to look up the words that you don't know, and take the time to write nice and understand what's going on. But a lot of adults, what they're doing is they still acting like they were when they're kids. A lot of people really haven't mentally developed, you know, or they haven't developed mentally, you know, in their minds and stuff, and that's what the major problem is going on. So I'm like, one time I was I went to Starbucks the other day, and I was sitting at this big table, and it was enough for like 8 people to sit. And a family came in, and father sat next to me, and his mother sat next to him. Then across from me was his wife's father, and then next to the father was the wife's mother, and then the wife, and the mother and the wife looked like identical twins, and she was older, but she was still beautiful. I was really shocked. I mean, she could have easily passed like for maybe 39 or 45, you know, Japanese lady, but you know, I'm sure but the daughter looked like she could have been 35 or something, right? But it was a trip. And then the daughter sat next to the mother, and then they had 2 daughters. So, and I knew they were probably at least 4 or 5 or something like that. But for kids that are over 3, I always do this sometimes. And I say, hey, how you doing? And he said, hi. And I said, my name is Ralph, and blah, 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 blah. You know, and I said, can I show you a way to teach our daughters English? I mean, not English, but division and multiplication, and it'll take less than 3 minutes. And he was like, wow, this girl sitting next to me, I have no idea who she is, but she looked like a sister. She straight looked like a sister. I don't know if you guys can see. She could be Japanese. I don't know, but she looked like a sister. But anyway, what happened was, he was like, okay, you know, and like, yeah, right. He's just like, yeah, right, okay. So I got a sheet of paper, and I showed him, and I said, what you do is you do this and do that. And what it is what I noticed is a lot of people, instead of looking at the steps in the process, they just conclude, well, I could do this. And I'm saying, like, and I'm thinking to myself, because he said, well, my kids, you know, this and that. And I'm like, well, they can draw circles. They might not draw them nice and neat, but if they do draw them, then how can I say that? They might draw them big, but it doesn't matter. You help them count, you know. He said, oh, okay. So I showed him what to do. He was tripping. And then I showed him what to do with the remainders, and he was tripping. And then the whole family was looking like, wow. And then I showed the multiplication. He was like, wow. You know, then he went to show us. And then what it was because it was so simple that he reached over to his daughter and said, here, let me show you something. She just ran off and stuff, you know. But the mother and the grandfather, their father, he was like, he had like those kind of, those kind of expressions that you would think, well, he don't want to talk to anyone. Well, I know that's not true. You know, he just don't know anyone. I'm probably because if you start talking, sometimes the wives are like, who's you talking for, you know, and stuff. And so when I showed it to him and everyone was looking, he was like, wow, that's Wakari Yasui. You know, he was like, wow, that's really, really, how can you say that? That's really easy. And they all got involved and stuff. And I said, what you do is you just teach the kids this, you know, and it's like, wow, okay. And so I was like, okay, fine, you know, and that was it. And then I started doing my work. And then the father started talking to me, and where you teach, what are you doing? I told him, I'm teaching English, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, how old are you? And I didn't really want to tell them my age, but I told them 51. They're like, whoa, you know, and all this stuff. And then, but I didn't have any, my flyers or business card with me, so I kind of messed it up. But it was cool. It doesn't matter. But anyway, basically what I'm saying is that a lot of adults, you know, they don't take the time to to go back over what they did, you know, and it's really a shame because that's the way society and things teach us, you know. So it's like you got these people on TV, newscasters, and what are not newscasters, but the people talking on news, I forget what they're called, and they sitting up there getting all this news and everything, and then they sit there and talk about how dumb they were in school or what they don't understand. And I'm sitting here going like, wow, you know, it's a trip. It is a trip. They just sitting here just talking about how dumb they are, you know, and this and that, and I'm like, wow. So then when you think about it, almost everyone in the world acts like that. Even when I'm telling you, when I do that mathematical thing with a lot of parents out here, they trip. They're like, oh my God, why didn't they teach us that in school? And I'm like, but they did teach you. I mean, you know, when you're doing math, what are you doing? You know? And I ask a lot of people, when you're doing math, what are you doing? Do you actually know what you are doing? You know, what is math? Math is nothing but an object. And I told my friend that I was talking to, he was like, what do you mean it's an object? And I said, well, I said 3, what is 3? He said, it's 3. I said, no, it's a dot on the graph where y is 0 and x is 3. And I said, and then you have all of these things, and they're just, all they are just objects. Math is just, how can I say it? Yeah, it's just an object, and that's it, you know. And so we kind of went through that and stuff. And by the time the end of the conversation, he was like, wow, okay, now I get it, you know, because we're talking about 3. I said 3 divided by 4 times 4. What does that mean? He said, well, it means to multiply. Well, we did the copy thing. That's another thing too. We did multiply. I said, what does multiply mean? And so he looked it up and was giving me all this definitions and stuff. And I was laughing. I said, it just means to duplicate or copy. Just use a synonym. Why would you, when somebody give you a meaning of a word, why would you start breaking out the definition of a word using a sentence when you can just use a synonym? That's what's good about a thesaurus. He started laughing and stuff. He said, okay, so it just means, you know, he said copy, he said multiply 3-4 times, you know, or copy, duplicate, or copy 3-4 times. And I said, that's funny. Look at what you just said. And I said, now imagine that in your mind. And he started laughing. He said, oh, you're right. It is. Math is just the vocabulary, because when you say copy 3-4 times, well, in the mind it's going to be 3 times 4. And he started laughing. And I said, man, listen, it's not that difficult. I said, the only thing is you just need to open up a dictionary. But if I were you, I would start with the source first, you know. But if you want to use a dictionary, fine. But the dictionary use words and the meanings that you got to look up those, so you're better off using the thesaurus. And it was just really interesting conversation, and then, you know, we just hung up and that was it. But I'll start again. Hold on.